Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Lauren Golden, your host for today's webinar, The Story of Tree Governance, from Consensus to Dynamic Governance, Successes and Challenges. Our guests today are Mark Piechota, who's sitting in the middle, Luigi Morelli, who is on the right, and Jared Jones, who is sitting on the left. And they are residents at EcoVillage Ithaca, who played an important role in transitioning their community, Tree, to dynamic governance. They designed this webinar to be interactive and conversational. So they'll start off by giving a brief overview of Tree and the transition to dynamic governance, or sociocracy, and then open up the space for you to ask them your questions. This webinar will last around 1 hour, but the room will remain open after the webinar for anyone who wants to stay and chat. So before we embark on this learning journey, let's just take a few minutes to get a sense of who is traveling together and what you're hoping to get out of our time. So in the chat, what Ted had pointed out in that chat section, if you would take 2 minutes and just say, where are you geographically? And then what are you hoping to get out of the webinar, if you have anything specific you're hoping to get. So I will start by putting those questions in the chat. Okay. So anyone who wants to use the chat, just check in by saying where you are in the world. Vancouver Island, Amherst, Portugal. Norway. Wow, we've got people from all over coming for this. Jared and everyone, are you able to see the chat, or do you want me to speak out loud where everyone?
Yeah.
Mexico, Baltimore, Maryland, Scotland, Nova Scotia, Florida, Arkansas. Oh. Wow. Oh.
We can now say that we've attended international conferences on dynamic governance.
Yeah, wow. This is what a neat group, everybody. Thank you for being here. So if anyone else has not yet signed in yet, like if you want to just like chat, put it in the chat. And meanwhile, Ted, if you would be willing, do you want to just speak for a bit about the hosting organization, Sociocracy for All?
Yeah, so I would just say, go with background noise again. I'm sorry about that. The hosting organization, Sociocracy for All, we do basically 3 things. One is creating resources and making them accessible to people, because we want people to be in choice about their governance system. We have a very strong bias towards sociocracy and dynamic governance, which is the same thing to us. So that's what our resources are typically about. We also network people who are using sociocracy, because we find that when you're the first one and it's hard. So we connect people from different countries in similar sectors and mix it up and create some cross-pollination. And we offer training and resources on that. And you will receive an email from me again right after this webinar with the most important things about that. But you will hear about it. And I think I'm complete.
Very good. All right, thank you, Ted, and thanks everyone for the opening round. So Mark, Luigi, and Jared, thank you so much for being with us today and being willing to share the story of Tree's transition with us. So maybe would you just start off by giving us a little bit of context around like an overview of Tree and the process?
Overview of Tree. Well, we're unusual that we're one of 3 neighborhoods in EcoVillage. And we are the one neighborhood that is using dynamic governance. Our neighborhood has 40 households and about, what do you think, about 70 adults in it. And the other 2 neighborhoods have 30 households each. So EcoVillage, which is the whole community, was formed 1997. And our community was fully constructed and occupied in 2015. The other neighborhood, Song, was completed 2005. So we've been doing dynamic governance for about 2.5 years, I believe. Anything else that I've missed with that overview, Jared or Luigi?
Well, I would just say that even though Tree is the only neighborhood that's officially using dynamic governance, it's bleeding out over the 2 other neighborhoods because I live in the first neighborhood, but was part of the 3rd neighborhood construction process. So I'm introducing DG principles to the first neighborhood processes.
There's much more we can say about our dynamic governance, but I'm leave it to Luigi and you, Lorraine, to ask questions or frame how we should present this fascinating topic.
So Luigi, is there anything more you'd want to add in the context, or do you want me just to start asking questions, or participants, if there's any questions that you want to ask to get the conversation going?
Maybe you can say a little bit what each one of us brings to the table.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So my name is Luigi, and I've come into Tree 6 years ago. And at first I was quite enthusiastic about consensus decision making, and I was facilitating. And then soon I saw the limits of what that could do. And so I was interested in bringing in modified consensus. That was in 2013. And it took until 2014 to bring it on board. And then soon after that, I was interested, I saw the potential in dynamic governance, and we started a group of 3, and we started educating ourselves, offering webinars, inviting guests, and then we culminated in 2016 with a training that Jerry Koch Gonzalez offered to the whole community, to the 3 neighborhoods. That's a bit of me.
And Jerry's training really led to a group of us forming a planning committee to develop a proposal for governance. And that was approved by our neighborhood in 2016, and we've been operating under dynamic governance since then.
I'm Jared, and I live in the first neighborhood, and I actually have lived up here the whole time that EcoVillage has been on site, which is about 23 years. So I've had plenty of experience with traditional full consensus, and that's one of the reasons I'm so interested in dynamic governance, because I've really experienced a lot of the pitfalls of full consensus in being active in the first neighborhood.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing any questions yet from participants. So, so for people who do want to ask questions, if you could use the Q&A. And someone's using the chat, and this was actually the question I was going to ask. So thank you for the people who wrote this. But what do you see as the limits of consensus? Like I heard that from several of you, like bumping it against the limits. So what are some of the limits that you ran into with consensus?
Go on, Jared. You've lived it for 20-some years.
Well, the basic principle of getting everyone involved in a decision-making process is sound. And it's optimal, but the realities of how that works really puts a damper on the effectiveness of the overall process, I think. Essentially what you have is a large number of people dealing with an issue that they probably don't know a lot about. Say we had a proposal about animal control in our neighborhood. There might be 4 or 5 people who are very well informed about this proposal, and the other ones may not have had any interest at all in the proposal until it comes all the way to the end of the group, the end of this process, and they're asked to consent to it. But at that point, it becomes quite a snarl, because you have a lot of people asking questions, and people who may not have any interest in animal control whatsoever, still slowing down this process where this small group of people has worked for 5 or 6 months to actually become informed and make a reasonable proposal. But then they have to bring it to the whole group which has typically in our first neighborhood, has led to an extreme level of wordsmithing, and it's almost like you work so hard to gain consensus that you want to make it perfect, and you want to make it kind of change-proof in a certain way, which is not the way life actually works. So what I have found in my experience with full consensus is when it's easy, it's great. But when it's controversial, you're wishing you had a lot of a different process to go through to get to that final point. So that's, yeah, guys contribute.
So one of the guidelines for dynamic governance is this proposal good enough for now and safe enough to try? What we found under consensus is it needs to be good enough forever, because you can't change it once it's been approved, or it's very difficult to. So there's a flexibility and an organic nature to decision-making under dynamic governance, because we say it's good enough for now and safe enough to try, and we set a timeline for this to be revisited. So people know that even if they're uncomfortable with it, we're going to bring it back and it can be changed.
In addition, one additional thing is the fact that in most full consensus processes in the first neighborhood, we've had an extremely high bar to actually reopen the decision. Whereas in dynamic governance, the decision is automatically reopened after a year or 18 months or 2 years, so that everybody has a chance to get provide feedback and then redo the decision, which usually needs just small tweaks, small adjustments. It's quite rare in my experience that a dynamic governance decision is completely thrown out the window and you start over again. It just hasn't happened in my experience. Yeah. So.
Yes, in the 2.5 years, I don't think most decisions have not needed to be amended at all. Only a few.
Luigi, did you want to add anything in around this?
Not particularly. I find myself in agreement. Another thing is that in consensus decision making, you have to sort of, the facilitation is pretty tough, and you find that very few people want to facilitate. And because you find yourself in tremendous tension, whereas in dynamic governance, more and more people have stepped in. So it's a greater process of education for everybody and participation.
So there are a lot of questions, and I will start taking them. But I just, for my own, just want to reflect for 1 second. So Jared, what I heard from you is that consensus works, but more on simpler, like when it works well, you were saying, but when it gets more complex and especially more contentious, you're wanting more tools that feel more effective almost, and that it doesn't feel change-proof. That struck me when you said that. And Mark, you were saying like that there's a flexibility and an adaptability, almost like an agileness to dynamic governance. And then Jared, you were just talking about the ability to revisit decisions, and that's really a time to incorporate feedback. So interesting. And then Luigi, the consensus facilitation can be tough, I guess, because it can be so challenging sometimes because of the tension you were saying. So am I hearing you say that facilitation feels almost easier with dynamic governance? Am I understanding that?
It's much easier.
Yes.
Easier.
Interesting. Okay. Fascinating. Okay. So lots of questions percolating. Hang on. Let me just start going through them. All right. So Karen asked, can we have a quick intro into all the decision-making models? I don't know if that's something that you guys want to do or even feel like that's something, or do maybe just the models that, so it sounds like the models that were up for you personally have been consensus and dynamic governance, also known as sociocracy. Yes, that's what your experience is? Okay.
And I would add just a little parenthesis of modified consensus, which puts the onus on the one who blocks an initiative to come up with solutions. But overall, we didn't experience that it was much smoother work.
Well, see, there's under dynamic governance, there's processes for decision making, but there's also structures. So those are different things, you know, the use of circles, one leading into another circle, and delegation of responsibility. But then within a circle, there's the decision-making processes that dynamic governance has outlined and facilitated. So I'm not sure how to respond to that question. The processes within a circle are one whole topic. The governance structure of circles within circles is a whole other topic.
Karen, if you want any more, let us know, but otherwise I will keep going on. How did you implement DG in the circles, all at once or gradually, with leaders as experts to help everyone, or?
Well, we did a very careful 6 or 7 page proposal to our neighborhood for the adoption of dynamic governance. In that, it had the processes and it also had the structures. And when people approved that whole plan, then we had volunteers joining various circles, and those circles elected their leaders, their facilitators, their secretaries. And within a couple months, we had the whole structure up and running. We also had to clearly define what each circle was responsible for, its aims and domains. Fortunately, we had a lot of guidance in this from Jerry Gonzalez, from Ted, and from Pioneer Valley and other friends that have implemented dynamic governance. So it wasn't as if we were recreating the wheel. We were learning from our neighbors.
Yeah, I would add that this is something important for who listens, that we for example, the structure of the flowers, we replicated much of that from Pioneer Valley cohousing. And then every kind of little snag along the way, I knew, other people knew, we could call and ask questions. And that's tremendously important for anybody who wants to start.
Lorraine, it might be good at this point to show the graphic of the circles. The 4 darker circles are our work circles that make most of our decisions. On the upper left-hand corner, you see PALS, which is plants, animals, and land stewards. Other side of the graphic is B&G, buildings and grounds. And the bottom is administration. And then finally, neighborhood life. Those are the 4 work circles that are making most of the decisions about our life and community. And they are coordinated by the center circle called the coordinating circle. It has 2 representatives from each of those 4 circles. On the very top, well, before I go on, those 4 circles and the coordinating circle meet every month separately. Also every month is the tree gatherings. This is the opportunity for everyone in the community to come together. And those are many times our celebrations or community deepening exercises, but they also have some major decisions that the whole community must make. For example, the annual budget, for example, major financial things. About 2 years ago, that tree gathering approved a clarified mission and vision and aims for the whole community. So major financial things or infrastructure changes, that monthly gathering will approve. Otherwise, the day-to-day functioning of the neighborhood is in those 4 work circles and the coordinating circle. And down at the very bottom is the co-op board. We are a co-op, and we have legal responsibilities as a co-op. That co-op board meets each month to do things related to the legal requirements of being a co-op. And lately it's been working on the household leases and subleases. We lease all of our units and the co-op owns them. So that's a beginning explanation for how we function. Well, except that it seems like we only have like 5 meetings a month. There's a lot of sub-circles for each circle doing a lot of the day-to-day work. So there's a lot of meetings that can happen on particular specialized subjects for each of those work circles.
Well, we have the the graphic on. I think one of the points I would make is that when you get to the level of the whole group in full consensus, there tends to be a predilection to micromanage these decisions. And in fact, what happens in dynamic governance is most of the decisions that apply to buildings and grounds are actually made by buildings and grounds with the input of people in the whole neighborhood. Same for administration, PALs, and neighborhood life, is that someone will identify an issue, they will come up with a very specific process to create a proposal, which is called picture forming. We may touch on that later. And then a proposal is advanced with all kinds of opportunity for the whole neighborhood to give input. And then it's brought to the coordinating circle for kind of proofing, in the sense of like, well, we love, parts 1 through 4, but have you thought about number 5, this possibility? And so they might send it back to buildings and grounds or neighborhood life and say, okay, this looks good, except work this out a little bit better. You're not addressing these key concerns. And then when it seems to be ready, it's quickly reviewed by the coordinating circle one more time, and then each circle would put out a message to the neighborhood that, look, we're going to make this decision on Tuesday. If you have concerns that have not been expressed so far, please come to that meeting. If not, we're going to approve this. So that's just one way that it's almost like it comes from a business model, in the sense that every issue has someone who's accountable for it. And that's something you don't necessarily see in the other neighborhoods. So we're very conscious about things not slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, and just as you mentioned, the difference between business and us being volunteers, that's the fact that, what you see in the middle is the coordinating circle. In business would be a higher level of decision making. With us, it's really coordinating. It's not, the decisions are not taken within the coordinating circle. But that's an element that is missing in consensus. You don't have the clear understanding of everything that is going on and the capacity to sort of coordinate and harmonize.
Yeah, the coordinating circle is not, doesn't make a lot of decisions. It advises the various work circles as they're doing their work, and leaves a lot of the decision-making to their expertise.
Thank you. It was helpful to see. So there's a lot of questions, and I'm hoping some of them are being answered through this graphic. And can I start giving you some of the questions from participants?
Sure.
Okay. So Susan from Perth, Ontario says they have a new co-housing project due to open next year. And I think I'm understanding the question. What do you say to a group that says consensus is enough?
I think experience will tell them whether they're correct or not. Our experience in our 3 neighborhoods has been, well, here's the positive. We operated under consensus for what, 5+ years in our tree neighborhood, made a lot of decisions. We got to know each other, well, as decision makers. We met with each other once a month, sometimes twice a month, and these meetings would be on a Saturday and Sunday, almost full days each day, to make some of these heavy decisions about construction and membership and costs, etc. And while they were challenging, we also did a lot of laughing, but they were also exhausting. And life wanted to catch up with us. And once we got settled and constructed and into our houses, we wanted to live our lives and not meet all the time. And there's ways for us to be together in a community other than having meetings.
my learning to, you know, when a community has decided to go one way and you want to go another, that could be take it as a long-term process. In fact, it was for us, first of all, because we needed to educate ourselves. And then we needed to listen carefully to what were the points of greatest interest. So if a community is set on consensus and you have a feeling that dynamic governance would be of more interest and more effective, then maybe you can introduce piece by piece. What about, you know, rounds, just doing rounds? What about just doing image forming? So familiarize people with parts of the whole and get them interested in the whole step by step.
Yeah, again, it's important to differentiate between the governance structures of dynamic governance and the governance processes within circles. Even if you're operating under consensus, you probably have subcommittees doing work here and there. You can learn a lot about the processes that would be beneficial to those subcommittees through dynamic governance.
Thank you. This is another Susan who has a specific question that's been discussed on the co-housing L recently and in her community as well, accountability. People have very different ideas about whether to track the work that people sign up to do or even don't sign up to do, while others in the community are doing a great deal. We tend to want to trust that everyone will participate responsibly, but it doesn't always manifest that way. So on the topic of accountability, any thoughts?
Boy, that is an issue that is endemic to every co-housing project in the whole world, I think. And probably not only co-housing projects. I mean, every organization, every nonprofit. I don't have any specific recommendation about that, but we have tried some things in TREE, for example, putting the membership of various work circles up on bulletin boards so people can see who's actually doing the work.
We've also put on the bulletin boards what people have committed to in terms of their community work. And we do have a community work sub-circle. I'm actually on it. And the three of us monitor what is being done and give helpful suggestions to people that seem to be looking for community work. We've learned that there's people that are willing to do work, but are looking for the right fit. And other ways that people are contributing to the community that might not go under the designation of community work, but it's a complicated process. It's not like, well, co-housing is not like a business where you have a defined job and you have to do it by a certain amount of time. People are contributing in different ways. So the question we're always asking is, what are the essential jobs that need to be done here? And what are ways that people can contribute to life in our community that wouldn't be designated as a quote unquote job? And looking at the life of the community.
Yeah, in a sense, looking at whether everything that needs to be done is more, in my mind, more effective than looking at whether everybody's putting in X amount of hours, given the vast range of differences. You know, we have from parents with 2, 3 children that obviously cannot put as much time, elderly, and, you know, different abilities all around. And we're all volunteers.
So yes, that's important to recognize that just our neighborhood, we have about 75 adults, and we range in age from the adults from probably 20 to 80 years old, varying abilities. Some have full-time jobs, some have full-time jobs and toddlers, others with teenagers. And some husband and wives both work full-time. So they have varying degrees of time available to contribute to the community, and we have to adapt to that. But we're all aware of our responsibility to contribute to this community, and so we're helping each other think that through.
Thank you. And Susan's writing her thanks. Like she said, that's very helpful. So thank you. Next question from John. What are the primary, hang on, my thing is moving. What are the primary gestures / patterns that define your practice of dynamic governance? Are there some decisions that are so fundamental to the identity of the community that you still run consensus or run a more rigorous process?
What are the defining features?
Do you want me to repeat it or you got it? Okay.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Yeah.
The first part.
I'll say it one more time. What are the primary gestures / patterns that define your practice of DG?
Well, I don't know whether it's a gesture, but what I've come to really appreciate about dynamic governance process is the use of rounds. I've been in meetings in the past where they've been very difficult decisions for the community to make, or for a group to make, and where one side is really pushing proposal A and one is countering with proposal B, and they're at each other's throats, they're not listening to each other, and it's a back and forth, and most people are just listening to this. But we know we have to make a decision. Fortunately, it hasn't been that extreme in our community, but it's been tedious and stressful. With dynamic governance, we're encouraged to do rounds. And with a round, everybody, well, you pose a very clear question to the group, and every person has a time to answer that question. No interruptions, no cross-talking. And what I've seen is the facilitator going around the circle, one person after another, and the two sides that are debating each other start to soften their stances a bit. And you keep going around in rounds. By at the end of the second round, all sides are agreeing because they've been forced to listen to each other through the use of rounds. That's one of the benefits to the dynamic governance processes that I've seen, and I've been always very pleased by that.
I would tend to agree with that, and the rounds also bring out the wisdom of those people who are not the most verbally aggressive, and who are better listeners, and that frequently results in a very positive solution. And you can just see a better solution emerging as you're going through these rounds, because everybody's contributing. Everybody, as Mark said, is forced to listen. And I think I am taking the use of rounds to every single meeting that I do in the first neighborhood, because it's so powerful.
Yeah, I would say it as when I am continuing just what they're saying, because that's very important. The rounds are very helpful, but so is all the other processes like image forming and proposal shaping, because they get you out of the idea that one opinion should prevail into, well, let's create something together. So I think that's the greatest shift. And it's easy to fall back into my opinion should prevail from every now and then. But when you go through the processes, then you're invited again to see that actually what comes out is a lot better than what you had in mind.
Some other hallmarks to dynamic governance for me is actually the delegation into circles, each circle having an aim and domain for its decision making. Another part is the whole selection process for leaders, secretary, facilitator. We don't just accept volunteers to be leaders or facilitators. The group actually selects them through a careful process. What we mentioned earlier of the philosophy of good enough for now, safe enough to try, with a clear evaluation of the decision sometime in the future.
Thank you. So I hear Mac has something to add. So Mac, if you want to type it into chat or somewhere, but if you have anything to add to this, Mac, who's involved with TREE, is as a participant. So anyway, while we're waiting, and I will definitely.
I'll wait for what Mac, I want to say something about the work Mac is doing, but maybe I should wait till he types in his question.
Okay. So while we're waiting for him, if it works okay, there's actually a lot of questions, and just seeing the time, I just want to make sure we get to as many as we can. So this one's pretty much a comment. Patricia said, it's interesting that the philosophy of good enough for now, safe enough to try is so similar to Marshall Rosenberg, founder of nonviolent communication, when he says anything worth doing is worth doing imperfectly. So do you see a connection between NVC and sociocracy? So I mean, I would just say quickly that there's definitely a strong link, and SOFA does a lot, the Sociocracy for All does a lot of linking between the two. Do you guys have anything that you'd want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, since I've gone into it extensively, what I get from that is that in parallel, nonviolent communication and sociocracy work well from the idea that everybody's needs can be met. And so if you can relax and trust into the process, you will find that everybody's needs will be met.
Okay, thank you. So just, I don't know if you guys still want to be screen sharing or not, but just.
What do we do? No, we don't need to do it.
Okay. I'm going to keep going down the question list. Jocelyn wrote, you all came to the style of governance after years in co-housing and using consensus. What would you recommend for a new community forming?
We went into sociocracy 1 year after we got into our houses. So we were using consensus as builders. What I would recommend for a community that's just starting out, talk to Jerry Gonzalez and Ted. Get their advice, because there's a lot of examples of how sociocracy is being used for startups as people are just considering construction. I can't give advice on that, because yes, I could give advice, but it wouldn't be knowledgeable.
And I would add to what Mark is saying is that join a network, you know, contact other communities that have done the transition, that have experimented. Yeah, I was surprised by how much people are willing to share knowledge and time. In fact, that's been a tremendous benefit for the community, how much people want to offer. You know, some people have come here to offer talks and be present to all questions. Others have been present on the phone. At other times, I have gone in places in which, you know, we met as peers.
And I guess I'd go back, now that I'm thinking about it, that my advice to a startup group is to learn the sociocracy processes. You can use those as a full group or as a subcommittee. Those are going to facilitate your decision making, picture forming, etc. The whole thing about circles and how the circles might interlink, I don't know about that with communities that are just starting up, but definitely the sociocracy processes.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I think it helps a new group get better organized, and fewer things fall through the cracks. I would strongly recommend it also.
Thank you. This question was from a while ago, and that's part of the, like with the queue, like this question is from a while ago, but it's still probably very valid. But could you explain a little bit what you mean by modified consensus? Shepherd Village wanted to ask. So what do you mean by modified consensus?
There's many, but we adopted one from Davis, California, and that's the process in which the people who come up with objections are then asked to convene a group or a circle, whatever you want to call it, to improve the proposal. So you can no longer just block. It makes people more cautious about blocking, but in final end, then might not be much faster when the blocker, undertakes to bring a correction. In our experience, it may be very lengthy.
Let me, yes, thank you, Luigi. I'm thinking again about some key things with dynamic governance in our tree neighborhood, and the mention of Mac's name. You had said he was typing something to you. Mac is our archivist. If you think about having 4 work circles and each work circle having 3, 4, 5 subcircles, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of minutes, a lot of decisions. We send those minutes, those decisions to Mac, and he puts them in the Google Drive. So we have a whole Google Drive of policies and minutes and other information that these hardworking circles have generated. And so anyone in the neighborhood can go back and see, what was that decision back in May that the Building and Grounds circle made? Oh, there's the minutes of the meeting. So we have that whole process, and Mac does a wonderful job archiving all of that. Then we have another process called our weekly digest that we send out to all of our tree members, alerting them to what meetings just occurred in the previous week and what meetings are coming up. And it's a digest that we expect all members of our community to look at, to keep informed about what's happening in our community. So the archiving of minutes and policies is one whole process, then the weekly digest is another. That weekly digest has links to what I'm just saying with the minutes and policies. So it's a handy, if a person is very busy like everybody else is and doesn't want to be looking at emails all the time, doesn't want to be looking at minutes of this meeting or that meeting, they go to the digest and they can see what was decided and what's coming up that they may want to be involved in.
Thank you. And Mac added his voice. So Mac, thank you. I mean, it sounds like a really huge and important role. So in chat, Mac wrote, need fulfillment can depend on timely transparency. This is optimized if meeting minutes are processed and posted in Community Drive ASAP after meeting. Some actionable information can rendered mute from delay of access. Transparency delayed is transparency denied. We have been uneven in this area. Yeah, that really speaks, thank you, Mac, to the importance of all that. Anything you guys would want to add to that?
At this point, we could share something that we do for that goal of transparency, which is we call it the Sunday Digest or the weekly digest. And it posts everything that happens on a week-to-week basis, and I do my best to find it. There it is. So, yeah, so if we scroll down, you see that all the decisions and all the circles. You do it because you know better the.
So this is the weekly digest of that went out last week. So there, at the top, you'll see community work, current work needs. We alert people what we need done. What's happening this week? We have a calendar that they can click onto. They'll see which day of the week various meetings are scheduled for. Then plants, animals, land stewardship. They did not have a meeting, but it alerts you to when the next meeting is. Its subcommittees are gardening and landscape and compost. Building and Grounds is the next big circle. And actually it met, and this is a summary of the key things that came out of its meeting, printed in red. Maintenance circle did not meet, or it did meet. And this is a summary of what happened, et cetera, et cetera. It goes down to each of the work circles and their subcircles, giving what happened and what meetings are coming up. And I go all the way down to the coordinating circle and what we did and any links that we have. So there's a summary of what was decided and a link to the full minutes. And that goes out every week on Sunday or Monday to all members. I think we can close that, or we can close that now if you want, or leave it open if people have questions.
Let's leave it open for a moment then.
So we are coming up on 10 minutes to the hour, and there are some more questions. So let's just see. All right. So we have, to what extent are circles responsible for consulting with the greater membership on a given topic proposal? And how do circles go about gathering this input?
Under dynamic governance, if, let's say I have a proposal about parking in our neighborhood and then changing the assignment of parking. Ideally, my circle would call a meeting of all members of the community who are interested to come together, and we do a picture forming exercise about what should we be considering as we consider this parking policy. What should be taken into account? It's like a brainstorming session. Then my subcommittee meets, drafts something, and puts out a copy of the initial draft to all community and invites people to come and respond to it. There may be a series of meetings that people voluntarily come to and give their input. But finally, it is the responsibility of that circle to make a final decision. And it's core members of that circle. But we are seeking people's advice, input.
One way that the coordinating circle helps that process is that since there are at least 2 members of each work circle that are also on the coordinating circle, any member of that work circle that's working on the proposal can come to the coordinating circles like, we've got it pretty well down, but there's this one thing we need some advice on. What do you guys suggest? And we would do a round or two on, you know, maybe parking of delivery vehicles or something, whatever that is, you know. And frequently, you know, the members of the coordinating circle are frequently the more experienced members of the community. And so there's a collective wisdom there that's really powerful, and frequently we can figure out a way of working it out.
Cool, thank you. All right, so we have 18 questions. Let's see how quickly we can move through them. Does that work for you guys? You guys are, I mean, it's so rich and but such great questions and such rich answers. So just thank you. All right, so Mary's wondering, you showed the tree structure. How did the community decide upon these circles?
Well, it was part of the initial proposal that we put to our community. We looked at all the areas of, well, first of all, we copied from Pioneer Valley. It's almost exactly the same as Pioneer Valley, but then we created our aims and domains for each one and thought, are there any areas of our community and community life that have fallen through the cracks, and to which circle should they belong? So we did a survey of what we project to the future, and felt like Pioneer Valley captured it pretty loosely and well in those 4 work circles.
Yeah, we even have PALs like they do, Plant Animal Land Stewardship Circle.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. There's another question, I'm going to skip around, but just kind of link them because they're on the same topic, but hang on. Can you explain a little bit more about how the circles lead into another circle?
Circles and subcircles? That would be the characterization, maybe.
Well, actually, it may have been me misspeaking. One doesn't bleed into another, but let's say the buildings and grounds has its own aims and domains. It may overlap a bit sometimes with PALs. Well, one explanation for building and grounds may be responsible for picking up tree branches that fall onto the earth. But PALS is responsible for nurturing the trees so the branches are strong and vibrant.
And for pruning the trees, maybe.
Yeah, pruning, maybe pruning the trees. So they designate the limits of their responsibilities. But if they do overlap, they meet together. Or if there is some tension between responsibilities, it's a coordinating circle that helps them clarify who should be doing which.
Thank you. There's a question here, how are decisions made in your circles? I mean, do you want to quickly address that, or?
Well, it's not differently from how they would be, we have said so far. So we have processes, from rounds to image forming, which means image forming means taking all the issues around a proposal that is forming and making sure to be comprehensive. And then shaping a proposal. If it's small and simple, it might be just the circle that does it. If it's more involved, the circle, as Mark was saying, will invite input. We'll have a previous conversation with the larger community.
And our circles, our work circles, may be 6 to 8 people. Those are the core members, typically. Those are the people who have committed to coming to every meeting and becoming more informed about the topics on hand. So our work circles are generally small circles, but we welcome anyone in the community to join them and commit to the monthly meetings. So typically we do rounds and come to agreement. But we also delegate to certain members to draft proposals that then they bring back to the group.
Thank you. And so Ted had put this in chat earlier, but just so everyone knows that all the participants will receive learning options and lots of information in an email following this webinar. So just to help with that. Jared, this is from Akunda. How can DG help improve efficiency in the example that you gave of animal control?
Efficiency. Well, I think decisions are made more quickly than they would be if you had to go to a different circle. They're also made by the people who are most, that are best informed about a particular issue. And they tend to be made by people who are, even if they don't know anything about animal control, they're more likely to be able to learn about it quickly than other. So a member of, neighborhood life might not have any interest in animal control, but in terms of buildings and grounds, it directly affects the integrity of the outside of the houses and also the integrity of the foundations and things like that. So we may have had a passing knowledge about related issues. So those are just some ways that it's more efficient.
Okay. How and when do you allow for some popcorn discussion during rounds?
We actually permit that in many of the meetings I'm attending. Let's say we have 6 people in the room, and the facilitator might say, well, let's just do popcorn right now. And then when an issue seems to be a sticky one, the facilitator might say, all right, let's do a round now. And the round stabilizes the conversation and gets people listening to each other. But we can switch back and forth.
Thank you. Hang on, so we're getting very close to the end of the hour. So this is what I would say. Let's take maybe one more and then bring this to closure, but the room remains open and the conversation can continue. But for those who need to leave on the hour, at least you guys get closure, and anyone who wants to stay and ask any questions that weren't asked, you will have time to do that if you want to stay. So actually, just based on, hang on. There's lots of questions and I'm trying to think. This was an earlier one. I think it was with your circles. How is the board connected to the rest of the community?
The board is made up of tree neighborhood members, and it has a very clear responsibility legally to following New York state law vis-a-vis co-ops. And in actuality, our neighborhood is formed as a co-op, and the board has final responsibility for everything. But the board has, as part of its bylaws, is able to delegate to committees certain decision-making. And it is seen that as the opportunity to delegate decision-making to the rest of the neighborhood through dynamic governance. Other co-housing communities may be condominiums, may be other things, and they'd have to see how they can operate under their state laws. But we have a very nice relationship to our board, and they're very supportive of dynamic governance.
All right, thank you, Jared, Mark, and Luigi. Thank you so very much for illuminating TREE to all of us and the whole process of transitioning. And just your candor and openness on all the questions. So thank you. And to all the participants who made time to be here with us today, thank you so much. I'm glad that a lot of the questions were answered, and I know we didn't get to everybody. So I encourage you to please stay on if you would like to. And just really thanks for being here today. And just a reminder, we said it before, but just keep your eye on your inbox because you will be receiving a note from SOFA pretty soon with resources for next steps for those interested in sociocracy and co-housing. So more information is coming, and anyone who wants to stay on will be able to come into the panelist room. And Ted, I'm going to actually let you talk about doing that because technology is not my thing. Okay.
Yes, so I'm talking about how to get into the main room. Is that what you're saying?
Please, if you would, just explain that.
So people have been wondering about this raise your hand feature. If you would like to be in the main room, raise your hand. If you don't know how to do that, then write in the chat and I'll try to find you. By raising your hand and being brought into the main room, you are consenting to being in the recording that will go public. So just be aware, you know, you're welcome here, and yet I will not edit one of the images out. So you can also shut down your video if that's a problem. I just want you to make a conscious choice here. So I will now promote to panelist is what this is. I find this great. You're going to be promoted. All right.
Green has left. No, green is there.
Okay. So as people are joining the room, do you want me to give you a couple more of the questions that were asked that we didn't have time for? Does that work? Okay, you can be thinking about it. Mukunda asked, how are the decisions that pertain to 3 neighborhoods reached? And I'll just give you a minute to think on it, like we'll wait for people to join. But the question is, how are decisions that pertain to all 3 neighborhoods reached?
Say that again.
Yeah, so I mean, you were talking about how at EcoVillage there's actually 3 neighborhoods. TREE has uses DG, the other ones don't. So how are decisions made that involve all 3 neighborhoods?
There is a village association.
Oh, well, hang on, think about, let's just let everyone have one chance to like settle in. Does that work for you? I just want to, people are still coming in and I don't want them to miss it. Hang on.
Just Lorraine, I've now promoted everybody who's raised their hand.
Everybody who's, all right. Welcome everybody. It's nice to actually see you. And so we're gonna keep going down the questions. And so Mukunda had asked, what about decisions that pertain to 3 neighborhoods? Like EcoVillage has 3 neighborhoods, only one of them uses sociocracy. So how do decisions get handled that pertain to all 3? How are they reached? Okay, go ahead, guys.
There is a village association. This is EcoVillage, and the village association has its own board and its process steering committee. It meets monthly. The village meets monthly. The village has very defined responsibilities. That's a shared resources about the whole community, which is the road, I think carports and parking. I think there may be a few other things, but
kind of holding the vision for the whole.
Holding the vision for the whole neighborhood. But they don't get into micromanaging each neighborhood, except for their area of responsibility. So recently, the whole village had to debate and agree on a proposal to actually pave the road, which hadn't been paved since the creation of the first neighborhood. And that was a lengthy process, but it came out very nicely, even without dynamic governance. And but it meant a major expenditure for each household to be able to pay for the paving of the road. And now we're dealing with some issues around parking and the village association is setting policy on parking for each neighborhood.
Thank you. Mukunda, I can actually see you. Does that answer? All right, he says thumbs up. Very good. The next question is from Mary, and I see that Mary is here. So Mary, I don't know if you want to ask it yourself if you're present with us, but you were asking about contentious proposals. Do you want me to read it, or would you like to just say it, Mary?
No, you can read it, Lorraine. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So when contentious proposals are being worked, does the team take it to both the coordinating team and the tree gathering during the feedback phase, or just the coordinating team?
There's been a little bit of everything, different ways to do it, but the main tool is either even community conversations or even an ad hoc circle. So we've had a number of ad hoc circles addressing one issue. And then the question is how to design the interventions, how to get everybody involved, how to form that circle, and so forth. I'm sure you have something to add to that.
Yeah, for example, we have a whole policy on our carports that was being drafted and storage. That policy was being done by the administration work circle, but it went through many drafts and was sent out to the community for feedback, mainly in community conversation. And there are many opportunities for people to chime in. And it was approved after 2 or 3 months, and it will be revisited every year to see how it's working.
Maybe we could just talk about community conversations, which are kind of like just a meeting where people have a chance to explore some of the issues without a lot of structure, to give feedback to the work circles that are working on a particular issue, and just get a sense of some of the potential issues, and just like a general meeting. You're not mandated to come, or just informative for the work circles that are working on a particular issue.
Sometimes in our monthly tree gatherings, there is a portion of the meeting that is delegated to a community conversation on an upcoming decision that a work circle needs to make. And so it's seeking the input of the broader neighborhood.
Thank you. I'm going to actually take some out of order, but just like voices that we didn't get to hear from yet. So Jacqueline asks, can any member come to a circle or sub-circle meeting if they want?
Definitely.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was easy.
They don't actually, unless they are an active member of the work circle, they don't get a chance to actually make the decision, but they can inform the work circle.
Thank you. Someone else asked, do you have a way to track people's work?
No, I think we steer away from that. It's more informal than that. That if they aren't doing work, we chat with them and find out why. But no, that thought had crossed my mind some time ago, and I got some sage advice about that kind of tracking does not enhance community. More conversations and meetings and other softer ways will enhance community.
Yeah, as a landlord who rents, I've had informal conversations with my renters, especially when I was clear that they're not participating, but conversations, not policing.
We generally don't, in some cases we borrow from the computer world, which is like trust but verify, that idea. But in our cases, we don't verify that much. We kind of trust more.
Well, we notice and we chat, but generally it's working out well enough for us. Just as, I'm retired. I have time. I can do a lot of work. I have my daughter and her partner living here with 2 toddlers. They don't have a lot of time. So I need to be very understanding of their limitations and their desire to contribute to the community, and they can't contribute to the full extent that I can.
And sometimes there are very odd reasons for not participating, you know, and a lot of it could be shyness and not putting yourself out or asking. And some people are almost more happier when they are asked directly, you know, reminded, then they'll move on to it.
We've
So,
also, oh, I'm sorry.
So I find the conversations are often more helpful, and repeating your effort to go out and reach.
We've also clarified and fine-tuned our whole membership process. People are interviewed by the membership committee before they decide to come here, and it's made very clear what our expectations are. And people, before they move in, are agreeing to the responsibilities of membership in this community.
And that the extensiveness of our orientation or membership process is based on a lot of things that did not work out well earlier in the other neighborhoods, which is like the last thing we want up here is to have a misfit between the community and a new member, because we've gotten to know them. You know, people have put out a lot of energy to make sure that it's going to work out. And if it doesn't work out, that's a big problem for them. And it's also a big problem for us. So over the years, our membership process has become much more detailed and much more extensive to try to address that situation.
Thank you. Another voice that hasn't been heard yet, Anna Ruth asked, do you differentiate between operational and policy decisions, functions, roles, etc.?
There's a lot of operational decisions that are being made every week that don't need a lot of extensive communication with the community. I know Buildings and Grounds does a lot and just keeps us informed about the decisions they're making. But when we, like administration has a policy that's going to impact people in their day-to-day lives, like parking regulations, we try to involve them before we make the final decision.
Yeah, DG, just for the theory part, makes a very clear distinction about operational and policy making.
Thank you. And this question seems very relevant. So Pete asked, are subcircles fully empowered to make decisions in their purview, or are subcircles issues? Let me start again. Okay. Are subcircles fully empowered to make decisions in their purview, or are subcircle issues brought to the primary circle for decision?
Yes, yes, and yes. It depends on, you need to define for each circle and subcircle their aims and domains. What is their domain? And if they need things finally approved by their parent circle, then that would be put into their charter. But in most cases, they're delegating to that subcircle the decision making. And there's also a difference between a subcircle and a helping circle. A subcircle is going to be meeting like every month, has a clear responsibility. A helping circle may have a task that it has to do on behalf of the parent circle. And once it's done that task, it's completed.
An example of that might be that, you know, a helping circle for the parking subcircle the task might be to go around to all the carports and see how many cars are actually parked in them, or what carports are so full of junk that they can't accommodate any cars. And of course, the reason for that helping circle would be so that we could actually, if every carport was open to having a car inside it, that would leave more general parking in the neighborhood. So.
Thank you. I think it's Craig asked, we struggle with using long email threads to gather input from members. How do you gather input on proposals from all members?
We've had more recourse to surveys, for example. That's a very effective tool.
Well, there's surveys, but we've had responses from community members of, I don't do email. I'm overloaded with email. I don't respond to surveys. I don't respond to questions. So we're saying, if you got an opinion on this topic, the meeting's coming up, show up, give us your opinions. So it's face-to-face mainly. And if they can't show up, then at least contact one of the members of our community with your opinions. But we've had some success with surveys, but it's best when it's face-to-face.
Craig, and a lot of it depends on the level of operation. So when we are in the compost circle, it's a subcircle, we hardly meet. So email is fine for deciding what leaves we are taking from the town or from other sources. And when things become a little bit difficult, I'm the emergency convener. So, you know, we'll decide that we need to have a meeting. But if things work out without a meeting, at I would say a very low level of complexity, then great. You know, just emails will do it.
Thank you. Jocelyn asked, and I see you here, Jocelyn. Hi, Jocelyn. Have any of you lived in smaller co-housing situations, around 15 to 20 people? And does consensus work better there?
I have.
No, I have only lived in a 30 household neighborhood.
I have in a very small starting community. Consensus, I wouldn't say consensus worked well. What worked well for that community was the practice of nonviolent communication. I don't know if consensus alone would have worked. Mm-hmm.
And again, it's worthwhile to differentiate between structure and process. The processes of dynamic governance would do well in any size grouping. But the circles and subcircles and coordinating circle may not be as necessary in a group of 20 people. But I think one of the ideal groupings that we've come to realize is groupings of 6 or 8 people coming together to discuss and debate. There's a lot more give and take in that grouping. You get larger than that, then there are people that are left out.
Thank you. So next is a question from Shepherd Village, which we see you guys, a whole big bunch of you, welcome. And they were asking, what is the process for generating your weekly digest?
The weekly digest, that's let's say I'm the leader of the administration work circle and we have a meeting, I make sure my secretary gets me the minutes as soon as possible. Then I send those minutes with a digest of the decisions to the weekly digest editor. Let's say that's Sherry, that is Sherry. So I send Sherry my digest and I send to Mac the actual full minutes. That digest Sherry uses to create the weekly digest. And it's a template that she just plugs in the digest and she keeps track of when the meetings are. But we have a weekly digest, call it reporter, and that's Sherry. And we send the information to her. And it just takes her about an hour each week to produce the weekly digest.
Ted actually wants to say something. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, just echoing, I agree with everything said, just echoing, sort of pointing out that if we move decisions to smaller groups, then it's not so much about managing decision-making, then it's managing communication and flow of information. So exactly what the three of them are saying, right? There's a lot of responsibility on both sides, both for people to stay informed, you know, read that digest, for example. I love the digest, I'm envious. And of groups to go out, get that feedback, get out the information. And it's not the, again, I'm just sort of adding, you know, I agree with everything. Highlighting that if we throw a lot of information at people, that's not transparency, that is information overload. Yeah. Because then they're just going to stop reading. So the digest, you know, the little snippet, like the summary, we have to actually be creative in how we can share information so that it's useful, right? Just maximum transparency is not actually transparent. That's the irony of things. Just like having everybody in the room isn't actually inclusive. So one has to sort of move beyond those things and go for the slightly counterintuitive but more effective version.
We learned from you, Ted. We learned from Pioneer Valley Cohousing Evaluation that the #1 problem that you listed was information
Yes.
sharing, information overload, efficiency. So we came out with that Sunday, was called Sunday Digest and then Weekly Digest. And also spent a lot of attention in how to, we spent quite a number of meetings in reformatting that. It used to be an attachment to an email. Now it's directly in the email. And we also spent some time and attention telling the circles how to really condensate, and the secretaries in the circle, how to condense the information so that it would be most useful for people. So if you want to know what happened in the meeting, you can go to the minutes, but most of the time you don't need to.
There's another level here. We have people, not unusual, we have people say, I don't do email. I'm just overloaded with email. What we said to our members is, there's certain emails you need to pay attention to. If that email starts with the heading Tree Official, you need to read that as a member of this community. There's only a few things each week that go under Tree Official. One is the Weekly Digest. Another one might be related to our monthly meeting. That's all. But it's the expectation that you read those emails.
The digest is also something that we've borrowed from, what has generally been borrowed from the business community. It's almost like an executive summary of what's going on in the neighborhood. So it's really, yeah, easy, relatively easy to read and really condensed.
I don't know if you guys saw the comment, but Ted said, and now Pioneer Valley Co-housing is learning from you. We've been looking at the digest after you showed it to Jerry. He was excited and told me about it. So it's nice to see, again, how information flows even between the different communities. All right, we haven't heard from Kate much. So Kate in chat wrote, how are new members onboarded to DG? Do you require new members to take training?
We do not require training, but we do meet with each of them and give them a one-page summary of dynamic governance and encourage them to join work circles. And as you know, as they're getting settled, we do more informal sharing of this is how it works. But we are looking forward to a time when we can get a refresher course in dynamic governance from our favorite Pioneer Valley co-hosts there, Jerry and Ted.
I have to say, as a completely non sequitur kind of thing, that it's amazing to look at the screen and see people all over the world live. You know, it's an amazing thing. I just am so appreciative of this technology. And I'm not a big techno person, but this is just amazing to do this.
Yeah, echoing you, Jared, and just, yeah, shout out to SOFA for hosting all these webinars. So Katie, I can see you. Did that answer your question well enough? Like, do you feel satisfied? Okay, excellent. All right, a couple other questions. You were so articulate and inspiring with your examples. Thank you. How do you encourage appreciation in your processes? And that's Patricia, who is on the line right now. Hi, Patricia.
How do we encourage what?
Appreciation in your processes.
We do appreciation circles at the end of meetings, or the larger meetings, which are fun to be part of. And we finish with a song, such as very enlivening. But then I don't know how every circle does it. And we might have a checkout. We've done that in a number of circles. So,
we also, if there's a proposal that's coming forward, before we start discussing the proposal, we generally do a round of appreciation for all the hard work that went into the proposal before there are concerns raised.
And the reason we adopted that kind of strategy is because people would not get to the appreciations. They would just start digging right into the proposal and completely deflate the egos of the people who worked so long on the proposal, you know. So we said, all right, let's put the appreciations first, and then it's much easier to handle constructive criticism after you had some appreciations.
Another way that appreciations come up in our dynamic governance is in the selection process. Like, periodically we want to change the facilitators or leaders or secretaries to our work circles. And we don't just do it by volunteers, we do it by nomination. And there's a whole series of rounds that we go through in the nomination process. So for example, in a round, they may call on Jared to say, who do you nominate to be the leader? You might say Ted, and it gives his reasons why. And then I might say Jerry, and I give all the reasons why. And Luigi says Lorene, and gives all the reasons why. And it just keeps going around with all these, with a round of appreciation for why that person would be good in that role. Now that person may not have thought about filling that role at all, but by the end of the round, their head is swelling in pride because so many people are appreciating them. And it generally leads to someone accepting the position by acclamation because everybody wants them and recognizes their talents.
Thank you. Mary had a question. What has TREE found to be essential jobs for the life of their community?
Essential jobs.
Can you specify a bit more, Mary?
Yeah, Mary, do you want to? Yeah.
Mary may be muted.
I was muted. Good morning. I know that this may be a little bit different for each community, and we have a cohousing community that is, we're about 1.5 years into move-in, and we have used consensus up till now, but we're kind of looking at and have formed a study group to sort of investigate the whole idea of implementing dynamic governance. And I'm just wondering, I know that in talking about, maybe this is, in terms of the domains and the aims, what were sort of the key pieces? Maybe you could just send me a copy of what those things are, the domains and aims that went into forming that, because I would assume that the essential decisions helped form those aims and domains. Is that, am I on the right track with that?
We have aims and domains for each of our major work circles, and if you send me your email address, I can send you that document that summarizes them.
Mukunda, you want to add something there? You're on mute right now. Hang on.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Here we go. All right. Well, I just want to mention that one of my big takeaways today is that in multi-generational settings, or where people have varying degrees of measurable contribution, it forces us kind of softly to redefine what equivalence is, and get us to become more mature about our understanding for everyone's available energies to participate in community work beyond their own little family unit. For example, you know, a single parent or a young family with kids may not be able to contribute as much as I think Mark was mentioning. And yet, if they have kids and the kids are bringing this youthful energy and effervescence that we older fellows really appreciate, that's a difficult to measure contribution, but it's extremely valuable. So I would be happy to, swap that for, their wealth is having that energy. My wealth is I have time, so I'll give my time. And so it's a more mature way of understanding everybody's participation. So I appreciate what you said, Mark.
And we can see how much how meaningful it is for parents to be together and work with each other, and for their children and for everybody, every one of us.
Thank you. So Kate had asked a question in chat and Ted had answered it, but just about the difference, the pros and cons of using the terms dynamic governance versus sociocracy. So the response is in chat if you guys want to look at that. And Craig had asked, do you use a logbook? Do you keep all your documents, minutes, etc. on Google Docs or on an internal website?
Google Docs. We have have been using Google Docs for a number of years now, and we're very pleased with it.
Craig, is that satisfactory? Does that answer? Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, because not everybody can use Google Docs unless they're on Google. And we've got a couple members who don't want to be on Google. And so it makes it difficult to use Google Docs. Also, there's a learning curve with Google Docs. We have to train people on how to use it. But did you have any problem with any of those issues? Check.
Yeah, there will always be some problems, but one of the responses that we're trying is some of the essential stuff we also post on a bulletin board in our common house, so that if people can't, like the weekly digest is posted in the common house, and I don't have a better answer than that.
Thank you, Craig, for your question, and you guys. So it is 30 minutes past the hour now, so maybe, let's see, is there anyone who has a burning question that wasn't answered? Let me ask, let's do that. There are like 4 remaining. We did a great job. We got down to 4. Is there a burning question that someone says, I just need this answered before I get off? And we'll take any burning questions. Patricia, is that a hand up or? Yes, okay, Patricia's a burning question. Go for it. Go, Patricia.
You're on mute, Patricia.
There you go.
Okay. I still don't understand the idea of the delegate and the leader. So if you have the circle and then you have subcircles and you have people linking to each other, for some reason, I just can't get that. But you guys are so articulate. I know you can explain it so I can understand.
We haven't talked, we have talked, we are part of a community of volunteers, but dynamic governance was started in businesses with hierarchical levels. So the leader kind of sends messages down, if you want. The delegate tends to send the messages up so that top and bottom integrate. With us, it's not as critical, but we still have it.
Where we at TREE see the most with leaders and delegates is every one of our 4 work circles has a leader and a delegate. Each of them attends our coordinating circle. So there are 2 voices for each work circle in our coordinating circle, and I found that very valuable. They don't really have different responsibilities in the coordinating circle. Other co-housing communities may do it differently, but it's mainly a communication function, making sure that things are communicated well in the parent circle and in the sub-circle. So it's in our coordinating circle that I see the most value for us of leader and delegate. And they may have 2 different titles when they're in the coordinating circle, but they have the same responsibility and the same rights.
Maybe a little thing is that in a group of volunteers, what happens if you have only one member and that member is absent? So it's good to have duplication, and that voice will always be present.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you. And Jocelyn, I see you waiting for a turn. Go ahead, Jocelyn.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. I was just wondering if you had a chance to sort of start over again, what would you do differently, if anything? Or would you set things up in a different way at all?
I mean, start all differently with dynamic governance, or start differently as a co-housing community?
Well, I was thinking more of the dynamic governance, or as a co-housing community. I was thinking more, would you set up your circles differently? Would you you've got rules and regulations, obviously processes. Would you set those up differently? Is there something that you can't go back and sort of fix?
Maybe I have something to that. I think one thing that would be very beneficial and that Pioneer Valley Cohousing has is a care and counsel group. Because you find dynamic governance is not the end all be all. And when things of trust become an issue, it's good to have an outside body that can really contribute. But that doesn't mean, it can be done at any time. It can be done at the beginning as it can be done later.
You say care and counseling?
Yeah, they call it care and counsel, and that means that when issues of trust run deep, then you have a body of people with experience that can address the issues that are raised, because it's not always easy to address them at the level of existing circles.
So you're talking about like almost a mediator, like sort of a mediator kind of person, or?
People, counselors, people who know how to listen, how to arbitrate a conversation, mediate, anything of that kind.
Okay.
The other thing that occurs to me that we have our work circles for making major decisions, and they're working well. What we don't have is a circle that is designated yet, and we're going to have it soon, I imagine, to look at the big picture. Who are we? Where are we going? What's our vision for life in this community? And how do we fit into the rest of the world? And how are we doing with that? Somebody that keeps asking those big questions. We've gotten really good at making decisions about concrete decisions. That's one thing we're gonna need to add. We can do that through yearly retreats and some other methods, but some group that's asking those questions.
Which I think is something that Pioneer Valley already does, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I spaced us on the question, and it had Pioneer Valley in it, so I assume it was to me. It was about, repeat your question, Jared.
Do you have a mission and vision?
Oh, yes. Do we have a mission or vision, or a circle for that? A circle for that. Yeah, well, I feel I agree with you. So often in cohousing, so in a standard implementation, you would have a mission circle, right? That is asking exactly those questions. And you would kick out the legal requirement for a board and put that group or whoever, something like a board in charge of asking those big questions. In Pioneer Valley Cohousing, we did not in our original implementation have a group like that, because people said, we don't need a board, we're self-governed, okay? And we felt that same need of, hey, where are we heading? Like, what are we going to do about aging in the next 10 years? There are big questions, like what are we going to do about sustainability, climate change, how does it affect all of that? Those are not operational, these are not decisions that we'll figure out this year. So we started what we call Vision Circle in Pioneer Valley Cohousing. And I'm not perfectly happy with how things how it got started and so on. So that's all things that could have been improved. But yes, that gap we did feel. And by the way, I know that you know that in Tree, but for our audience, you can change the structure at any time. There's some rules about who can change what and who you have to ask and get consent from. But this is not a cast in stone thing. You see a gap, you change it. You see something isn't working well, you change it. So you're in charge of how you do it. Yeah, but having sort of that long-term vision, somebody who's paying attention to that is an excellent idea.
Thanks, Ted. Thank you, everybody. So I'm looking around, no more burning questions. Am I just like, yeah, everyone's feeling full? This is a full meal, guys. Thank you. It was lots of really helpful stuff. I don't know if you got a chance to see comments, but when people left, they said, thank you, how helpful it was. So just thank you for your time. And everyone who showed up today, thank you for the questions that you brought in to guide and shape the conversation. It was a really full conversation. And Sofa, thank you for hosting these great webinars.
Thank you, Laureen, for excellent facilitation and of this webinar.
Oh, it was a joy. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Be well. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Be well.
Be well.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Keep your eyes out for the email from Sofa. Bye, everybody.